They wanted her to fall first. "Send the servant in ahead of the others," Chancellor Dreven said, not bothering to lower his voice because a servant is not a person you lower your voice for. "She'll draw the first blow. Better her than a champion will miss." I stood on the high stone of the warding ground with the storm coming down off the peaks behind me, and I watched them push a girl out onto the killing floor the way you'd toss a bone to quiet a hound. She did not stumble. That was the first thing. Every year I had watched them send the weak ones out first, the debtors, the oath broken, the ones whose deaths the realm had already decided it could afford, and every year those ones stumbled. They looked back at the men who had condemned them. They begged with their eyes. They died with their hands open, reaching for a mercy that was never coming, and the hollow took them in the first breath of the warding and were made stronger by the taking. This one walked to the center of the standing stones like she had chosen the spot herself. She set her feet. She looked at the pass, not at the crowd, not at me, not at the council on the high stone, but at the black notch in the mountains where the enemy would come, and she waited. I had led the trial of the standing stones for 11 years. I had held the pass of Warden against the hollow when the last of the old wardens were already bones in the frozen ground. I knew a fighter's stillness the way a smith knows good iron by its ring, and I felt something in my chest go quiet and hard when I saw hers. She was not old. Younger than my champions, I thought, though the plain gray servant's dress and the road brown of her skin made her age hard to read. Her hair was bound back tight and simple, the way a woman binds it who does not want it in her eyes when the work comes. Her hands hung loose at her sides, and her face, I have gone back to that face 1,000 times in memory, her face held nothing that the crowd wanted from a condemned servant. No fear, no plea. Only a kind of watchfulness, level and old, as if she had already looked at death a great many times and found it a familiar thing that did not need much of her attention. Dreven leaned close to my ear. "It's a kindness, sire, in its way," he murmured. "The kitchens are full, one less mouth, and the champions live an hour longer for the hollow feeding on her first." I did not answer him. I have learned that the men who explain their cruelties as kindnesses want you to argue, so that the argument becomes the thing and the cruelty slides past. I only watched the girl. Then the horn sounded from the wall, 3 long notes, the notes that mean the thin moon has risen and the throat is open. And the first gray shape came down out of the notch, and there was no more time to wonder about a servant. Let me tell you what the warding is, since you were not born inside these mountains, and did not learn it with your first words the way I did. Vorin is a high realm, a realm of storm and stone, of fastnesses built into cliffsides and villages that cling to the shoulders of the peaks like nests, of drums that carry news down the valleys faster than any rider. It is not a rich land. It is a hard, proud, cold, beautiful land, and it has held itself free for 1,000 years for one reason and one reason only: the pass. There is only one soft road into Vorin. The old tongue calls it the throat, a long, narrow notch between 2 peaks, the single place where an army or a flood or a raiding thing can come up out of the low country and into the heart of the realm. Every other way in is cliff and ice and death. So the truth of Vorin has always been simple: whatever holds the throat holds Vorin. And what waits on the far side of the throat, what has waited there longer than any chronicle, longer than the first stone of the first fastness, is the hollow. They are not men. I have killed enough of them, close enough, with their breath on my face, to tell you they are not men and never were. They are gray, a wet, lightless gray, the gray of a drowned thing, and they come low and wrong in the joints, more than a wolf and less than a man, with too many teeth and eyes that do not hold light. Where they come from no one knows. The oldest songs say the mountains birthed them in some year before the world was named, that they are the land's own hunger given shape. What I know is that they come when the moon turns thin, every 29 days, up out of the low country and into the throat, and they try the pass with tooth and iron and a patience that is worse than fury. And if they ever break through, if they ever pour past the throat and into the soft valleys behind, Vorin ends. not falls, ends. There would be nothing left to fall. Once we had the wardens to hold them. The Ashfell line. I grew up on the songs of them the way every Warden child does. Men and women born to the storm-gray blood who could take a second shape, a great wolf, storm-gray, twice the size of any true wolf, born and made for exactly one purpose, to stand in the throat every thin moon and turn the hollow back. For 700 years an Ashfell warden stood in the pass, and the hollow broke against them the way water breaks against a cliff, and Voren slept safe behind its one guarded door and did not even know how lucky it was. Then 100 years before I was crowned, the last warden fell. The songs do not agree on how. Some say treachery, that a rival house, jealous of the honor the Ashfells were given, betrayed them in a thin moon warding, and let the hollow take the pass so that no one would ever again stand above the great houses the way a warden stood. Some say only that the line had grown thin, that there was but one warden left and one warden is one mortal body, and that body took a wound it could not heal and the throat was empty by the next moon. The Ashfell hold burned that same year, that part the songs agree on, the burning of the hold in the west, the fire that could be seen from 3 valleys. And after that there were no more wardens, and Voren, which had never in 700 years needed a plan for a world without them, made one, and made it badly. We held the trial. Every thin moon, the great houses send their best fighters into the standing ground to hold the throat by ordinary steel and ordinary courage. No storm-gray blood, no second shape, only men and women with blades standing where a warden used to stand, and dying where a warden used to turn the tide unharmed. We call it the trial of the standing stones. We wreath it in ceremony and honor and old words, and it is, underneath all of that, simply this: a realm without wardens, buying each thin moon with the lives of its bravest, and losing. Because we are losing. Slowly, the way a strong man loses to a fever, a step of ground each year, a champion buried each season, the hollow coming a little further up the throat before we turn them, and turning them a little later and paying a little more for the turning. When I was a boy, the hollow were stopped at the mouth of the notch. When I was crowned, they were reaching the first stone. Now, in the 11th year of my reign, in a bad thin moon they reach the 3rd stone before we break them, and every champion in Voren knows what that arithmetic means, even if the council will not say it aloud on the high stone. That there is a thin moon coming not far off, where the 3rd stone will not be enough, and the throat will open, and Voren will end. My shield brother Corwin knew it. He used to say it to me in the low hours, the two of us at the fire after a warding with the dead not yet buried. We're spending ourselves against something that spends nothing, Arden, he'd say. A man dies once. The hollow come again every moon, and there's always more of them. You can't win a war where the other side doesn't run out. He was right. He was always the one who said the true hard things I did not want to say as king. Corwin died in the throat 4 winters ago. I will tell you how, because it is part of this, though it costs me to set it down. We were holding the center at the 2nd stone, the two of us, back to back the way we had fought since we were boys. His blind side mine, my blind side his, the oldest and simplest covenant 2 fighters can make. And the hollow came heavy that moon, and the line to our right buckled, and I made a choice. I turned to shore the right to keep the whole line from folding, because I was the king and the line was mine to hold. I turned away from Corwin's back for the space of 6 heartbeats. 6 heartbeats is enough. When I turned back, the hollow had opened his guard on the side I had been guarding, and by the time my blade reached them it was already done, and my shield brother, the one man in the world who had stood at my back since we were boys wooden-sworded in the training yard, died in the mud of the throat because I could not guard his back and hold the line at once, and no man can do both, and I had chosen the line. I held the pass that moon. The songs call it a great warding. I buried Corwin 3 days later on the shoulder of the peak where we used to watch the storms come in as boys, and I came down off that mountain a different king, and after that I did not let anyone stand behind me again. I mean that as a plain fact, not a poetry. For 4 winters I held the center of the throat alone. I would not take a shield brother's place at my back. I fought a little turned, always a little braced, one ear and one edge of my eye forever on my own blind side, because I had learned in 6 heartbeats what it costs to trust another body with the part of you that you cannot see, and I had decided I would rather carry the whole burden of my own back than ever again choose the line over the man behind me. The realm called it strength. The songs made me the lone king who needs no shield. It was not strength. It was a wound that had never closed, worn like armor because I did not know how else to carry it. That was the king who stood on the high stone that thin moon and watched a council send a servant girl out to die first. The first of the hollow came fast. It came straight for her, low, gray, wrong, quicker than a thing that shape has any right to be, because the hollow are not stupid. They read a field the way a wolf reads a herd, and they know a lamb staked out when they see one. It went for the girl the council had given them, and I was already moving. I moved because, whatever Dreven intended, I do not let the hollow open a warding on an easy kill. A kill in the first breath feeds them. It makes them bolder for the whole rest of the moon. A champion who dies badly in the opening costs 3 good deaths later in the night. So I came down off the high stone toward the center, meaning to reach her, meaning to take the first of the hollow myself and deny them the girl's blood. And I was 3 strides too far and too slow, and I saw the gray thing leave the ground for her throat, and I thought, with a cold that I knew too well, another one, and I could not stop it again. She stepped inside the leap. Not away from it, inside it. As the hollow thing left the ground, she turned her shoulder into its chest, took its full weight against her body, and used its own speed to carry it past her. And there was a short blade in her hand that had not been there a breath before, drawn from somewhere in that plain gray dress, and the hollow folded around the steel as its own leap drove it onto the point, and it went down between the stones in a heap of wrong gray limbs and did not get up. She wiped the blade on its hide. She stepped back to her mark. She looked at the notch for the next one. The warding ground, which had been a wall of noise a moment before, the houses shouting for their champions, the drums, the storm went strange and quiet. I stood where I had stopped, 3 strides short, my own blade half drawn and useless in my hand, and I stared at a servant girl standing over a dead hollow between the stones, and I did not understand what I had just seen. I have watched 10,000 fights. I have trained champions from the time they could lift a sword, and I will tell you plainly, I had never seen a first blow answered like that. Not by a champion, not by a master of the yard. To step inside a hollow's leap requires that you not fear it, and every fighter fears the hollow. Every one, the fear is bred into Warden bone, and to turn its weight the way she had turned it requires 10,000 hours of a body learning a thing until the body does it without the mind, and a servant does not have 10,000 hours of that. A servant has a scrubbing brush and a cold hearth and a place at the bottom of the world. The second of the hollow came, and the third, and the warding began in earnest, and I had to stop watching the girl and fight. But I will tell you what she did through that whole long night, because it is the beginning of everything. She held. The champions came out onto the standing ground in their house's colors, in good mail with the training of a lifetime, and they fought as Warden champions fight, which is to say bravely and skillfully and at a terrible price. 2 went down in the first hour vein of the river house, whom I had known since he was a boy, gone to a pull-down at the second stone, and a Halden man, one of Tor Halden's cousins, who took a hollow through the guard and did not rise. That is the trial. That is what it costs, every thin moon, and every thin moon the houses cheer their champions out and weep them home. And through all of it, the servant girl stood at the center and did not fall. More than did not fall. She worked, that is the only word for it, a kind of grim economy of motion that wasted nothing, that met each hollow with exactly and only the force required and no more, that never overreached, never panicked, never gave the gray things the wild opening that fear opens in a fighter. She fought like someone conserving herself for a long night, someone who had done long nights before. Where the champions spent themselves in great brave strokes and tired, she stayed even, unhurried, terrible. By the third hour the champions were flagging and she was not, and I saw the hollow begin to do the thing they do when they meet something that does not tire, begin to go around her, to avoid her mark and press the flanks instead, the way a river goes around a stone it cannot move. And somewhere in that third hour she drifted, not far, a pace, two. She moved back into her right, out of the raw center into the space at my left. Into the space where a fighter stands who means to guard the man beside him. And something in me that had been shut and braced for 4 winters came awake like a coal breathed on. I want to be precise about this, because I have heard the old singers make the bond into a scent or a light or a hand laid on the heart, and I do not doubt them, but for me it was none of those things. For me it was this. I stopped guarding my own back. I did not decide to. I want that understood. For 4 winters my whole body had been a man watching his blind side, turned a little, braced a little, one edge of me forever behind me. It had stopped being a choice long ago and become simply how I stood in the world, how I breathed, the shape my body had learned. And the moment that girl set her feet at my left in the standing ground, all of it, the turn, the brace, the old buried dread of the 6 heartbeats, went quiet, not eased, gone. The way a sound you have lived with so long you no longer hear it becomes a silence. You feel the instant it finally stops. My back was covered. My body knew it before my mind would say it. And more than that, I knew where she would be. When I struck to the right, I felt, without looking, that she had taken the thing coming from my left, and she had. When a hollow lunged for my spine, I did not turn, because some certainty older than thought told me she already had it, and she did. And it fell dead at my heel with her short blade in its throat, and I had never so much as glanced her way. I had fought beside 100 good men. I had fought beside Corwin, who was the best of them, for 20 years. And I will tell you the thing that shook me more than the girl killing the hollow inside its leap. I had never, not once in my whole life, not even with Corwin, been able to not guard my own back. Even with him I had held a portion of myself turned backward ready. It is what a good fighter does. It is what keeps you alive. With her I did not. Something in the certainty of her at my left let me put my whole self forward, into the fight, into the front of it, the way I had not been able to since I was a boy who did not yet know what the world could take. And with my whole self in the front of the fight instead of split between front and back, I fought that night the way I had not fought in 4 winters, and the 2 of us held the center of the throat past the point where the center should have broken. And when the moon thinned toward morning and the last of the hollow drew back up the notch, the pass was held, and I was still standing, and so was she. I nearly got us both killed twice, standing there feeling it. That is a thing no song will tell you, that the first touch of the bond is a distraction that can kill you, that I had to drag my attention off the miracle of my own uncovered back and put it back on the gray teeth in front of me before one of them took my throat while I marveled. The bond does not care whether the moment is convenient. It arrived in the middle of a warding and nearly finished me, and I have laughed about it since, with her, in the low hours, though I did not laugh that night. We held. When the horn sounded the end of the warding, the long single note, the note that means the moon has thinned past the hollow's hour, and the pass is safe until the next. I stood in the center of the standing ground with my chest heaving and the storm running off my armor in sheets, and I turned to find the servant girl. She was already walking away. Back toward the low doors under the high stone. Back toward the kitchens and the scullery, and whatever cold corner of my fastness they kept her in, walking with the same unhurried economy she had killed with, as if she had done nothing, as if she had not just stood in the throat of Warden the whole long night, and turned the hollow with a knife she'd hidden in a servant's dress. "Wait," I said. She stopped. She did not turn all the way, just half a look back over one shoulder, wary and level, taking my measure the way she'd taken the hollows, weighing what this was going to cost her. I crossed to her. The ground was emptying, the houses carrying their dead and wounded down, the drums gone silent, the storm easing to a cold, gray drizzle. Up close she was younger than I'd thought and older in the eyes than any girl her age had a right to be, and she was streaked with gray hollow blood and her own. From a shallow cut along her jaw she did not seem to have noticed. "Your name," I said. "Sable, my king," flat. A servant's answer, offering the name and nothing under it. "Where does a kitchen girl learn to take a hollow inside its leap, Sable?" And there, for just a breath, I saw it. The smallest flicker behind the level eyes, quickly shut, the look of someone deciding how much of a thing to give. "I've watched the trials from the wall for years," she said. "A person learns." It was a lie. Not a frightened lie, a practiced one, worn smooth from long use. The lie of someone who has told this exact lie many times and knows it holds. And it does not hold. A person does not learn that from a wall. You cannot watch your way into a body that turns a hollow's weight without thinking. That is bought with blood and years, and this girl had supposedly bought it standing on a parapet watching other people die. I would have pressed it, but Dreven and his council were already coming down off the high stone, already reaching to fold the moment back into their own hands, and Sable looked past me at them the way a fox looks at a farmyard, marking the dogs, marking the gate, and before I could ask the second question she said, "By your leave, my king," and was gone through the low door, back into the dark under the high stone, and the moment closed. That night I did not sleep, and for the first time in 4 winters it was not the old dread that kept me from it. I stood at the deep window of my chamber that looks down the length of the throat. I have that window because I do not trust the past to anyone's watching but my own, and I turned one thought over and over like a stone in my hand. My back was covered. I was a king who had buried his shield brother and sworn no living soul would ever again stand at his blind side, and a servant they had sent to die had, without a word, without my leave, without knowing what it meant to me, taken the one place in the whole world I had closed forever, and my body had let her. My body had known her before my mind had a name for what she was, had put down 4 winters of bracing in the space of a breath because she set her feet at my left. The bond had chosen. I knew what it was. Every Vorin child knows the old word for it, the fated pull, the thing the Ashfell songs are full of, the thing I had thought was only a song. It had come to me at the age of 36 in the middle of a warding, wearing a servant's dress, and it did not ask whether the timing was good, or whether a king could afford it, or what it would cost her to be wanted by me. And under that thought, colder, was the other one, the one I did not let myself finish. Where does a kitchen girl learn to take a hollow inside its leap? They came for her the next morning, and I learned who my council truly were. We met in the map room, the long stone chamber where the throat is drawn in old ink across the great table, every stone of the pass marked, every thin moon's high-water line recorded in a fainter and fainter creep up the notch toward the heart of the realm. Dreven was there, and 3 of the great house lords, and Tor Halden the Halden champion, the pride of that house, the man the council had meant to spare when they staked the girl out first. Dreven did not waste time. "She cannot go in again, sire." "Explain that to me," I said. "It looks ill." He spread his hands, the reasonable man, the man who only wants what the realm needs. A servant standing where champions fall. The houses are already asking. Their sons and daughters die in the throat by the dozen every season, and a scullery girl walks out of a full warding without a scratch worth nomming. What are they to think? That their dead were fools? That the honor of the trial is a lie? It undermines the whole trial, sire, and the trial is what holds Vorin together. "The trial is what holds Vorin together," I repeated. "The trial is what is losing Vorin, Dreven. Slowly, every moon, a step at a time, and you have known it as long as I have, and you have hidden it behind ceremony because the truth, that we have no wardens and are spending our best to buy time we are running out of, is a truth no chancellor wants written under his name." I put my hand flat on the map, on the faint high-water line that crept up the notch year by year. A servant stood in the center of the throat all night and turned the hollow while champions fell around her. That does not undermine the trial. It shames the men who let a fighter like that scrub pots for years while better-born fighters died in her place. Tor Halden spoke then. He was a big man, fair and handsome and proud, a genuinely fine champion. I want to be fair to him because he becomes a better man before this is done. But that morning he was a proud man who had been shown up, and he did not carry it well. He had held the safe flank all through that warding. He had come out untouched, and it galled him that a servant had done in the raw center what he had avoided at the edge. She got lucky, sire, Halden said. A trick, once. The Hollow will read her the second time. They always read a fighter by the second moon. You'll send her in again on the strength of one lucky night and she'll die like the rest, and then the houses will say the king threw away a servant to make a point, and that will undermine the trial too. He said it reasonably, and half of it was even true, which is what made it dangerous. Then let them read her, I said. She fights again. I told myself it was strategy, and it was. We were losing the pass. Here was a fighter who could hold the center better than any champion I had. Only a fool benches his best sword because it embarrasses his court. All true, every word. And under it, the thing I did not say to the council or fully to myself, that I could not go back into the throat with my back braced and blind again. I had felt for one night what it was to have it covered, to put my whole self into the fight, to fight the way I had not since I was a boy. I would not go back into the pass without her at my left. I could not have told you that morning whether I wanted her fighting again for Warren's sake or for my own, and I am not certain, looking back, that the two were ever truly separate. Dreven's face closed like a door. "As my king wills," he said, in the exact voice men use when they intend to will otherwise, and I marked it, and I should have marked it harder than I did. I began to watch her after that, not as a king watches a subject, as a man watches the thing his whole self has quietly reorganized itself around, though I would not have said that then. She did not make it easy. She kept to the low ways of the fastness, the servants' stairs and the kitchen yards and the cold back passages, and she did her work. She was, it turned out, a real servant, not a champion in disguise. She scrubbed and hauled and mended like the others, and had for years, and she gave the court no purchase on her at all. When the houses tried to make something of her, to lift her up or pull her down, she simply was not there to be made anything of. She had a genius for absence. I came to understand it slowly for what it was. Not shyness, not a servant's fear of her betters, but the long, practiced discipline of a person hiding something, keeping her head down not from meekness but from strategy, staying small so that no one would ever look closely enough to see what she was. I saw her fight once more before the next thin moon, and not in the ground. There is a rough training yard behind the barracks where the off-duty guards spar. And I came through it one gray afternoon and found a knot of them around two figures, and one of the figures was Sable. A guardsman, a big one of Halden's men, I think set on by Halden or by Dreven to test her, to find the trick and break it, was pressing her hard with a blunted blade, meaning to put her down and prove the lucky servant's story to the yard. And she was letting him. That is what stopped me at the edge of the yard. She was letting him drive her, giving ground, looking clumsy and overmatched, taking blunt hits on the shoulder and the ribs that a servant would take, playing the part of a scullery girl who'd had one lucky night, right up until he overcommitted, sure of her, and swung a blow to end it. And she was not there. She had moved, the small economical move I'd seen turn the Hollow, and his blunted blade meant nothing, and his own weight took him past her and down into the mud of the yard. And she stepped back and lowered her wooden sword and looked, again, at nothing in particular, as if she had done nothing, as if she had not just made a Halden guardsman fall in front of his fellows while pretending the whole time to lose. She was hiding even then. Even winning, she made it look like an accident, like his stumble and not her doing, so that the yard would laugh at him and not wonder at her. And I stood at the edge and understood a thing about her that I had not, until then. That she had been hiding her whole life, that hiding was as deep in her as fighting, that whatever she was concealing she had been concealing since she was small enough to learn it in the bone. She saw me at the edge of the yard. Our eyes met across it. And she did the thing I did not expect. She did not look away, did not duck her head, did not perform the servant. She held my eye for a long moment, and there was something in it that was almost a question, almost a warning, and the gray in her eyes in that flat afternoon light was more than I had let myself see before. Then she set the wooden sword back on the rack and went. And the wolves, 3 of the fastnesses gray war beasts, the rangy border wolves my houndmaster swears can barely be got to lie still for meat, rose from where they had been lying at the yard's edge and went with her, at her heel. Easy, the way wolves go with someone they have decided is worth their teeth. My houndmaster cannot get those wolves to do that for anyone. They lay at a scullery girl's feet like hearth dogs. I found her that evening on the outer wall. I had gone up to walk the wall as I do before a thin moon, to look at the throat and take the measure of the coming night, and she was there before me, alone at the parapet, watching the notch the way she'd watched it in the ground, not idly, but with the whole of her attention, a fighter studying the ground of a battle not yet come. And the 3 wolves were with her again, 2 lying easy at her feet, and 1 sitting up at her side with its great gray head near her hand. And the wind came off the peaks and pulled at all of them, and for a moment before she heard me I saw her unguarded, and she looked in that moment less like a servant hiding than like something ancient keeping a watch it had kept for a very long time. She heard my step and did not startle. She never startled. I never once in all the time I knew her managed to come on her unawares. "They shouldn't let you fight me in again," she said, not turning. "Dreven's right that it looks ill." "Dreven's afraid it looks true," I said. I came and stood at the parapet a careful arm's length from her, and the wolf at her side lifted its head, considered me with its yellow eyes and put it down again, judging me no threat, which from that wolf was a kind of blessing. "Where are you from, Sable, truly? Not the wall you say you learned it from?" She was quiet a long time. The wind ran over the stone. Below us the throat lay black and waiting in the last of the light. "A hold in the west," she said finally. "Burned when I was small. I don't remember its name, I was too young and no one who could tell me lived. I was carried out of it by a man I don't remember either and left at the gate of a fastness, and the kitchens there took me in because a body has to eat and a strong child is worth its keep. And then another fastness, and another, the way an orphan goes. And I learned to be small and useful and not looked at, because a child alone in the world learns that fast or doesn't learn anything else. That's all of it. That's the whole story." "That's not the whole story," I said. "That's the story you've told 100 times so you never have to tell the true one. You fight like something the world stopped making 100 years ago." She turned then and looked at me full, and in the last gray light her eyes were not the plain brown I'd first taken them for. There was gray in them, a shifting, living storm gray, the exact color of the sky over the peaks in the hour before it breaks, a color I had seen in no human eye and only in one place in all the songs. "Some things the world stops making," she said quietly, "don't always stop being made, my king." I did not let myself say the word. It was there between us over the black waiting throat, and I did not say it, because to say it was to make it true, and I was not ready for what it made true, and I think she saw that I would not say it and was grateful, because she was not ready either. "There'll be a bad moon soon," she said instead, looking back at the notch. "You feel it too. The high-water line on your map, it's been climbing. The hollow have been counting you. They count, you know. That's the thing everyone forgets about them. They're not a storm that comes blind. They count your fighters and they count your dead and they count how much later you turn them each moon and they wait for the number where they win." She said it flat, the way she said everything, but I heard under it something that had nothing to do with a servant. "It's coming, that moon. Sooner than your council will say on the high stone. And when it comes, ordinary steel won't hold the throat, however many champions you feed it. You know that. You've known it since Corwin died." I had never told her about Corwin. I had never spoken his name to her at all. I looked at her for a long moment. She looked back level and did not take it back, and did not explain how a scullery girl knew the name of the shield brother a king had buried on a mountain 4 winters ago and spoken of to no one since. Some things the world stops making, I said slowly, don't always stop being made. Something crossed her face, not quite a smile, but the ghost of where a smile would go in a face that had learned not to make them. Go and sleep, my king, she said. You've got a warding coming and you'll need it. And she gathered herself off the parapet and went along the wall toward the low stair, and the 3 wolves rose and went with her, guarding, and I stood a long time after she'd gone with the wind off the peaks and the black throat below, and a word I would not say sitting in my chest like a coal. I slept that night. For the first time in 4 winters I lay down and slept without the old dread, and I did not fully understand why, except that some part of me had already decided who stood at my back, whether my mouth was ready to say her name or not. Driven made his move before the moon. I should have seen it. A man whose face closes like a door and says, "As my king wills," is a man arranging to have his will done by other hands. And Driven had built his whole power on the slow, careful management of Voren's decline, on being the steady chancellor who kept the trial running and the houses balanced, and the ugly truth hidden, on being indispensable to a realm that was quietly dying and did not want to look at it. A servant who could stand in the throat and turn the hollow was, to a man like that, not a hope. She was a threat, because if there was one storm-gray fighter scrubbing pots in the fastness, then the thing Driven had spent his life managing, the loss, the decline, the necessary spending of lives, was not necessary at all. It was only what he had settled for, and nothing frightens a man who has settled like proof that he did not have to. So he tried to have her removed before she could fight again, quietly, the way such men do everything. I learned of it because the wolves would not leave her door. My houndmaster came to me the morning before the thin moon, troubled, to say that 3 of the border wolves had planted themselves outside the servants' quarters in the night and would not be moved, hackled and low and watching the passage, and would let no one near a certain door, when I went down to see it myself, that opened on the small cold room where Sable slept. And when I had the wolves let me pass them and I went in, I found her sitting up against the wall in the dark with her short blade bare across her knees and a dead man on the floor by the door. One of Driven's quieter men, the kind a chancellor keeps for quiet work, with her blade's mark in him and a thin blade of his own still in his hand that had been meant, I did not doubt, for her throat while she slept. He came for the servant, Sable said, flat in the dark. Not the warden. He didn't know about the warden. He thought he was cutting a scullery girl's throat in her sleep to keep the trial tidy. She looked at me across the small dark room, and there was something terrible and tired in it. This is why I hide, my king. This is why I've hidden my whole life. A hidden warden lives. A known one is hunted by the houses that don't want anyone standing above them again, by the councils that have settled into the losing and don't want the losing questioned, by every man whose place depends on there being no wardens. The last ashfells didn't fall to the hollow. You know that, in your bones, the songs half know it too. They fell to their own realm, to the houses that were jealous of them, and their hold was burned to make sure the line ended. I've spent my whole life making sure no one ever looked closely enough to see that it didn't. I stood over the dead man in that cold small room, and I felt something in me go very still and very cold and very clear. Not the bond. Something older and simpler than the bond. A king's fury, that a man of my own counsel had reached into my own fastness to cut a throat in the dark. You could have gone, I said, any of these years. You could have run, hidden somewhere the houses would never look, lived. Why stay? Why fight in the ground at all that first night if hiding has kept you alive your whole life? She was quiet. The wolves shifted in the passage behind me. Because I stood on your wall 100 nights, she said, and watched your champions die in the throat holding a pass I was born to hold. And I told myself every moon that it wasn't mine, that hiding was the only way to live, that a dead warden helps no one. Her jaw tightened. And every moon I watched better people than me die for the thing I was made for, because I was too much a coward to be what I am. That first warding, I couldn't watch it any longer. Driven put me in it to die, and I thought if I have to be in it, I'll at least fight. I'll at least not die like the ones I've been watching die, reaching for a mercy that isn't coming. I didn't mean to hold the center. I didn't mean for you to see. I meant to fight enough to die on my feet and end the shame of watching. She looked up at me. And instead you saw. And now here we are, with your Chancellor's man dead on my floor, and there's no hiding it anymore, is there? No, I said, there isn't. I had Dreven's man carried out, and I set my own guard on Sable's door, my own, sworn to me, not the fastness watch that Dreven could reach. And I went to find my Chancellor, and I will not set down here what passed between us, except that Dreven understood by the end of it that his quiet work had been seen, and that the King of Warden knew what he was, and that the only reason he was not already answering for it on the block was that the thin moon was upon us, and I would not tear my own counsel apart with the hollow one night from the throat. He understood, too, that his time was measured now in the space of one warding. A man like Dreven always understands the arithmetic of his own survival before he understands anything else. And then the thin moon rose, and the throat opened, and everything I have told you was only the road to that night. It came worse than any warding in living memory. I knew it from the first horn. The hollow came down out of the notch not in a raiding band, not even in a heavy tide, but in a flood more gray shapes than I had ever seen at one moon, more than the oldest men on the high stone had seen, a river of them pouring down the pass, and I understood in that first breath, with the cold certainty of a man who has spent his life reading the throat, that this was the number. This was the count the hollow had been waiting for. This was the moon they had spent years counting toward, when the fighters we could field were fewer than the flood they could bring, and the arithmetic finally, after 100 years, came out in their favor. This was the moon Warden fell. We fought anyway. Warden does not give the throat cheaply, whatever the count. The champions came out in their colors, and they fought the way Warden champions fight, bravely and skillfully, and at a terrible price, and the price that night was terrible beyond any warding I had led. Vane's brother went down at the first stone. 2 of the river house went down together holding the left. The line bent and buckled and bent and held and buckled again, and the storm came down like the sky itself had chosen the hollow's side, and I stood at the center with Sable at my left, and for a while, for a long, impossible while, the 2 of us held the raw heart of the throat against a flood that should have washed us away in the first hour. I fought that night the way I have never fought before or since, with my back covered with her at my left, with my whole self in the front of the fight, and not a portion of me forever turned behind. I fought like the boy I had been before the 6 heartbeats that took Corwin, and better, because I was a man grown with all a man's years in my arms and the fear that had haunted me since finally, blessedly gone. And Sable fought beside me the way she had that first night, even and unhurried and terrible, and where I struck she covered, and where she struck I covered, and for a while we were not 2 fighters but one thing with 2 blades and no blind side at all, and we held the center while champions fell around us, and I began, God help me, to believe we might hold it all the way to the thinning of the moon. Torhaldon fought that night. I want it recorded because he had called her a trick and held the safe flank at the last warding, and this night he held no safe flank. This night there was no safe flank. The flood pressed every stone at once, and he fought at the right with everything a Haldon has, and he fought well and long and bravely, and he went down at the 3rd stone with a hollow's tooth in his shoulder, holding the right until the right could not be held, and he did not die, but he was out of the fight, dragged back bleeding by his men, and the right began to fail without him. And there were too many. That is the plain truth that no courage answers. There were simply too many. The hollow broke the first stone, they broke the second. The line of champions, the best of Warden, thinned, and could not thin further and hold anything at all, and I felt the center itself begin to go, felt the flood find the gaps that no number of living fighters could fill, and I saw the gray river begin to pour past us, past the stones, past the failing line, up the last of the throat toward the low doors and the soft valleys and the whole sleeping realm behind. I understood, with a cold worse than any wound, that this was the moment the songs would call the fall of Warden, that in 100 years the singers would tell of the night the throat opened and the hollow came through, and this breaking flood, this failing line, this king at the center with nothing left to hold it. This was that night, and I was the king it happened under. I turned to put myself in the gap. It is the only thing left to a king when the line fails, to become the line himself, to put his own body between the flood and the realm, to buy with his death whatever breath of time a death can buy. I turned to set myself in the broken center, one man, one blade, the last thing standing in the throat of Warden, and I felt Sable's hand close hard on my arm. "Not you," she said. And her voice had changed. Gone low, gone rough, gone down into something that was not quite a human voice anymore. And when I turned to her, the storm gray was full in her eyes, not a flicker, not a shading, but a fire, the whole storm of the peaks caught and burning behind her eyes. "This is mine," she said. "It was always mine. I only stayed hidden because a hidden warden lives and a known one is hunted, and I have been a coward my whole life, and I am done being one." She looked at me, and there was something in it like an apology and something like a challenge and something like a farewell. "Stand clear, my king. You'll want to stand clear." "I don't stand clear," I said. "Not from your side, never again from your side." Something moved across her face, surprise, and under the surprise something that answered the thing in me I had not let myself name. And then she let go of my arm, and she stepped forward past the last stone, into the full teeth of the flood, into the gap where Warden was ending, and she changed. I have no better word for it. I have tried in the years since to find one, and there is not one, because the tongue of men was made by men who never saw it. The rain around her turned to steam. Her shape drew up and out in gray, storm gray, the gray of her eyes, the gray of the sky before it breaks, and where a servant girl had stood in a torn plain dress, there stood a wolf the size of a war horse. A wolf out of the oldest songs, out of the 700 years before the last warden fell, out of the burned hold in the west and the ended line, and all the mourning of a realm that had thought its wardens gone forever. A warden of Ashfell, storm gray and vast and terrible, standing in the gap of the throat exactly where her kind had stood for 700 years, exactly where the world had said no warden would ever stand again. The hollow flood that had broken 2 stones and 100 champions, that was pouring past us toward the death of Warden, met the warden in the gap. And broke. I will not pretend I struck the blows that saved Warden that night. The warden saved Warden. She stood in the gap the champions could not fill, and she turned the flood the way the song said the Ashfells had always turned it, not by numbers, because she was one, and not by luck, but because she was made for that exact place, and the hollow knew it in their crooked bones, the way water knows a cliff it cannot move. The flood that had been a river became a battering of water on stone, and then a spending of water on stone, and then, as the long night wore toward the thinning of the moon, a failing of it, the hollow breaking themselves against the warden in the gap and being turned and turned and turned, until there were fewer of them and fewer, and the flood that had come to end Warden began at last to fail against the one thing in the world it could not pass. What I did, what I am proud to have done, small as it was beside what she did, was stand at her flank and keep the few that slipped the gap from reaching her blind side. For the first time in 4 winters, I guarded someone's back and trusted them to guard mine, and I felt the whole broken thing in me that had never closed since Corwin died knit itself whole as we fought, the 2 of us, the warden and her king, in the gap of the throat under the breaking storm. By the time the moon thinned past the hollow's hour and the last horn sounded the end, the throat of Warden was held, not lost a step, not lost a stone, held for the first time in 100 years, the way it was meant to be held, by a warden standing in the gap, turning the hollow back into the low country from which they came. The warden stood in the gap under the last of the breaking storm, and the whole of the warding ground, the champions who yet lived, the wounded, the houses on the high stone, the council, driven where he stood among them, all of them stood in a silence I have never heard before or since. Not the silence of the last warding, when a servant killed a hollow inside its leap, and the crowd went strange and quiet with wonder. This was deeper than wonder. This was the silence of a realm looking at a thing it had mourned for 100 years and never thought to see again, standing whole and vast and storm-gray in the gap of its one guarded door. And then she changed back. Storm-gray to steam to a woman, spent, streaked with gray blood and her own, standing in a torn servant's dress in the center of the standing ground where they had sent her to die first. And she lifted her head, and she looked up at the high stone, at the council, at the men who had staked her out ahead of the champions to draw the first blow and spare a fighter they'd miss. Nobody spoke. Dreven's mouth worked. I watched it. I watched the chancellor who had built his whole life on the slow, safe management of Warren's decline, who had hidden that the realm had no wardens, who had spent its best in the trial and called the spending necessary, who had sent a quiet man in the dark to cut this girl's throat in her sleep to keep his losing world tidy. I watched him look at a living warden standing in a held throat and find that there was nothing, in all his careful words, that he could say. Because the whole of his power had rested on there being no wardens, on the losing being necessary, and she had just stood in the gap and shown the entire realm, in one night, that it was not necessary, had never been necessary, that Warren had had a warden scrubbing its pots for years while his council spent its children in a trial that need not have cost a single life. There is no speech that survives that. There is nothing a man like Dreven can say when the thing he swore was impossible is standing in front of the whole realm with the hollow's blood on it. Tor Halden, dragged back bleeding to the edge of the ground, sat against a stone and stared at her, and I watched his pride go out of him, not broken but emptied, the way a wound empties cleanly all at once. He had called it a trick. He had held the safe flank and then, this night, held no safe flank and fought bravely and fallen. And it had not been enough. None of it had been enough. The courage of the best of Warren had not been enough. And the thing that had been enough was the servant he'd called a trick, standing in the gap as what she truly was. There is a particular quiet that comes over a proud, brave man when he is shown the size of a thing he mocked. Halden had it. And to his lasting credit, I will come to it, he carried it better than most men could. I have humbled men before. I have executed traitors and taken the surrender of proud lords and won field battles that ended houses. I have never in my life seen anything humble a proud court the way that spent girl humbled mine, asking nothing, saying nothing, only standing in the held throat and letting the silence do the whole of it, letting them look at what she was and what they had done to it, and what it had cost them not to see. I could have made a coronation of it. I want to be honest that I felt the pull of it. That is what the songs want. The king crowns the warden, throws his royal cloak over her shoulders, takes her hand and lifts it before the court, names her Luna, the servant made queen in a single golden stroke. I have seen kings do it, and I understand the wanting, and half of Warren would have wept to see it, and it would have been in every visible way a giving of honor. I did not do that. I have thought a long time about why in the years since, and it comes to this. A cloak thrown over her shoulders would have made me the giver and her the given, the king raising the servant. One more man in a long line of men, deciding her worth and handing it to her as if it were his to hand. And she had never once in the whole of it needed a man to decide her worth. She had covered my back before I knew her name. She had stood in the gap when I turned to die in it. She had been a warden of Ashfell scrubbing pots in the dark while her realm mourned wardens as lost. She was not something I could elevate. She was already, and had been all along, above every man on that high stone. They had only in their smallness failed to see it. To crown her would have been to pretend I was lifting her up to me, when the truth was the other way entirely. So I did the one thing I could do that said what I actually meant. I walked out to the center of the standing ground in front of the whole silent court in the last of the storm, and I did not put a cloak on her, and I did not take her hand and raise it. I stood in front of the Warden of Voren, and I turned my back to her. I turned my blind side, my dead brother's side, the side no living soul had stood at for 4 winters, the side I had sworn no one would ever have again, the wound I had worn as armor since the 6 heartbeats that took Corwin from me in the mud of this same throat. I set myself in front of her, facing out at the court, in the plain posture of a fighter guarding another fighter's back, the king of Voren, second guard to a servant they had sent to die, in the sight of every house that had watched her staked out ahead of the champions. Behind me, I heard her breath catch. "You don't have to stand clear from my side," I said, low, only for her, my back to her and my face to the court. "And I don't have to guard my own back. Not anymore. Not since the first horn of the first warding, when you set your feet at my left and I stopped being a man who watches his own blind side. I didn't have a name for it that night. I have one now, if you'll have it." I did not turn. I let the whole court see the king of Voren standing guard at a servant's back, and I let that be the crowning, because it was the only true one. I won't put a cloak on you, Sable. You don't need my honor laid over you like a blanket. But I'll stand at your back the rest of my life, and let the whole realm see me do it. And that's a thing I've never given any soul but one, and I buried him on the mountain, and I never thought to give it again. She was quiet a moment. The storm ran off both of us. The court did not breathe. Then I felt her move, felt it the way I had felt it since the first horn, a breath before it happened, and she stepped to me. And she set her shoulder lightly against mine, back to back, the two of us facing out at a court that did not know and would spend years learning what it was seeing. "I've guarded that back since the first night," she said, rough and low, close to my ear. "You were only the last to know, my king. That is nearly the whole of the night. The songs will make more of the after, and there is an after, there is a great deal of after, but the true shape of the thing that mattered, happened in the standing ground with the storm running off and the throat held, and the court struck dumb and the king of Voren standing guard at a servant's back because she was a warden, and he had finally, after 4 winters, let someone stand at his. Let me tell you the after, since you have come this far, and since the after is where the devotion I have hinted at all this while actually lived. Dreven's counsel did not survive the warding. A realm that has seen a true warden stand in its throat does not go back to the men who hid that it had none. The houses turned on the counsel of their own weight, without my having to lift a hand, the moment they understood how many of their sons and daughters had died in a trial that need not have cost a single life. Dreven himself I did not put to the block in the end, though he had earned it twice over, for the losing he'd managed, and the throat he'd sent a man to cut. I stripped him of his chancellorship and his lands, and I sent him down out of the mountains to the low country, to live the rest of his life in the flat soft world below the throat, the world he had been so willing to spend Voren's children to protect his place in. Sable asked me for that mercy, in fact, not for his sake. She had no love for him, but because, she said, a warden's return should not be written in the same ink as an execution. And she was right, as she was right about most things, and I have never regretted listening to her. Tor Halden mended. And here is the thing I promised I would come to. The next thin moon, when the throat opened again, for the hollows still come, they will always come. A warden turns them but does not end them. Halden was there. He came up onto the standing ground with his shoulder barely healed, and he took the flank without being told to, and he held it. And he did not once, that night or ever after, call anything a trick. A proud, brave man shown the true size of a thing he mocked can go 2 ways. He can curdle, or he can grow, and Halden grew. He became, in the years after, the first of the champions to fight beside the warden without a shred of the old resentment, and the loudest voice in the houses for honoring what she was. And I think I never asked him plainly that he was ashamed enough of the safe flank and the word trick that he spent the rest of his life making it right, and a man who does that is a better man than one who was never wrong. I came to count him a friend. Not what Corwin was. There is only ever one of those. But a friend, and a good one, and I will not pretend the boy who called her a trick and the man who died old holding the flank at her side were the same man. Trial changed. We do not send the weak ones out first anymore to draw the first blow. There is nothing now to buy time for, the throat holds because a warden holds it the way it was always meant to be held. The champions still fight, the hollows still come. There is still a price to the thin moon because a warden turns a flood but does not turn it alone, and the best of Warren still stand in the throat beside her. But they do not die by the dozen for an arithmetic that was always going to lose. They stand behind a warden now, the way 700 years of Warren stood behind the Ashfells, and the high-water line on the great map in the map room, that had crept up the notch year by year toward the heart of the realm. It does not creep anymore. I had the old lines left on the map, all of them, the whole 100-year record of the slow loss, so that no chancellor after me ever forgets what a realm looks like when it decides its losing is necessary. And I had a new line drawn at the mouth of the notch, where the hollower stopped now, every moon and turned. And the burned hold in the west I sent men to find it, though Sable did not remember its name. They found it. Ash and old stone, 3 valleys off, a ruin 100 years cold, the hold the song said the Ashfells died in. She would not let me rebuild it. It's a grave, she said. Let it be a grave. I'm not the last of a line that needs its old hall back. I'm the first of whatever comes next. But we went there once, the two of us, up into the western valleys, and she stood a long time in the ash of the place she'd been carried out of as a child, and she did not weep, because she was not a woman the world had left much weeping in, but she stood there with her hand on the old cold stone, and I stood at her back the way I always stand at her back now, and after a while she said, "There'll be more of us. In time. It's in the blood, and the blood doesn't end whatever the houses did. There'll be wardens in the throat again, a line of them, and none of them will have to scrub pots in the dark and hide what they are." And I said that there would, and I meant it, and it has begun to come true, but that is a longer story than this one and belongs to the years, and to children not yet grown. There is a hearth, and a chamber, and a great slow learning of one another that I will not set down in a chronicle, because it is ours and not the realm's, and a warden's devotion and a king's are not things to be handed to singers. I will say only that the woman who had learned to be small and useful and unlooked at her whole life took a very long time to believe she was allowed to be large and seen and loved, and that I took a very long time in return to believe I was allowed to sleep with my back to another living soul, and that we taught each other, slowly, over years, in the low hours, and that there is no work of my reign I am prouder of than that teaching. She gives me choice in all things. I give her the same, and the intensity between us, whatever the songs may sing, was never once a thing of force, but of two people who had each spent a life guarding a wound, learning to set the wounds down and stand back to back against everything else instead. And me, you have followed me this far, you may as well have the whole of it. For 4 winters I did not sleep, because a man cannot sleep who must watch his own blind side, who cannot lie down and turn his back to the dark of a room without the 6 heartbeats coming for him again and again, the turn, the line, the choice, Corwin dying on the side I'd left. I told the realm it was a king's discipline. It was only fear, worn as armor because I did not know how else to carry it, and it very nearly hollowed me out before she ever set her feet at my left. I sleep now, every night whole and easy, the way I have not slept since I buried my shield brother on the mountain where we watched the storms as boys. Not because the hollow are gone, they come every thin moon, and every thin moon they break against the warden in the gap and are turned back down into the low country. I sleep because there is, at last, someone in the world I have let stand behind me, someone whose eyes hold the storm gray of a line the world thought dead 100 years. Someone who covered my back before I knew her name, who stepped into the gap where Warren was ending and became the thing she'd hidden her whole life because she was done being a coward, who never once asked to be raised for it, and who would not have taken a cloak if I'd offered it. They sent her out to fall first. She was the only one left standing when it was over, standing in the gap of a held throat, storm-gray and terrible and spent, with 100 years of a mourned line come back to Warden in her one body. And I, who had sworn on a mountain grave that no living soul would ever again stand at my blind side, I have spent every night since with my back turned to her, and slept, and been glad, and let the whole realm see me do it, and called it the truest crown I ever gave. Let the singers make of it what they will. I know what it was. It was a servant they sent to die, and a king who had forgotten how to sleep, standing back to back in the throat of the world, each at last guarding the other's blind side and the storm breaking over the peaks. And the hollow turned and Vorin held, and neither of us ever again alone.